Okay, let's unpack this. We have a spectacular and often challenging stack of material today.
It's a lot to get through.
It really is. It all stems from a recent conversation with the analyst and observer of technology and geopolitics, Mookie Tenenbaum.
Right.
And the core of what we're diving into is this really critical perspective he has on global attempts to control the internet.
Specifically for young people.
Exactly. And, why these regulatory efforts are not only failing, but, and this is the key part, actively distracting governments from a far greater, potentially existential crisis.
That's exactly right. We're looking at the collision point between what well-intentioned lawmaking and the reality of modern technology. The mission is pretty clear.
What do you see as the mission?
We need to understand why major developed nations, we're talking about the UK and Australia, are struggling, even failing, to implement age controls online.
And the central tension, as Tenenbaum lays it out, is how to effectively protect the vulnerable
Without completely compromising personal privacy or destroying the fundamental open structure of the web.
or, and this is the kicker, inadvertently pushing those same children toward even greater risk.
That's the real irony of it all.
And before we get into the legislative failures and the technical loopholes, Tenenbaum frames his entire argument with this brilliant introductory observation.
Oh, the travel anecdote, it's perfect.
It's almost absurd, but it perfectly sets the stage for examining revolutionary technology that just through sheer repetition becomes commonplace, becomes ignored.
It connects the historical past with the hypermodern present in the most jarring way imaginable.
So, Tenenbaum was recently traveling in Florida near Orlando and specifically visited a place called Titusville,
The small town.
a very small town that sits right next to the major launch sites for SpaceX. I mean, we are talking about the absolute cutting edge of human technology.
Daily or near daily launches of orbital class rockets.
Yeah.
It's the sound and spectacle of revolution happening, every morning.
But the town itself, Titusville, is just steeped in this incredibly dense, bizarre, and often forgotten American history.
Which is the exact opposite of futurism.
Exactly. The town is named after a figure they called Colonel Titus.
Right, but as we learned, he wasn't really a colonel in any traditional sense.
Not at all. He was a 19th century adventurer connected to the mid-1850s political turmoil in Kansas, the period often known as Bleeding Kansas.
Which was essentially a preview of the Civil War, a very ugly time.
A very ugly time. And he was firmly aligned with the pro-slavery faction, so when things collapsed for his side in Kansas, he wasn't done with his political adventurism.
He fled.
He fled all the way down to Nicaragua, and there he got mixed up in the infamous William Walker case.
Which is a fascinating, though, a very dark historical detour.
It is. This is where a U.S. mercenary briefly seized control of the entire country of Nicaragua.
So you have a small Florida town named after a pro-slavery Kansas adventurer who tried to conquer Central America.
A town just full of old diners and heavy Southern accents, people telling these strange local tales. It's a slice of old America.
And you contrast that historical density with the most cutting-edge technological activity on the planet.
Rockets that achieve orbit launching right over their heads, shaking the ground every single morning.
But here is the crux of the observation that frames our entire deep dive. This is the whole point.
The locals are completely indifferent.
Completely. Nobody watches the launches anymore.
It's no longer a novelty, it's just noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tenenbaum noted this pervasive apathy, a spectacle that should inspire awe, that represents the pinnacle of human engineering. It's just become background noise.
Like a train passing through, part of the daily commute.
Right. And this sets up the episode's core theme. What happens when revolutionary disruptive technology becomes so routine, so commonplace, that we, or crucially, our governmental structures, fail to appreciate its true foundational impact?
And instead we choose to focus our energy on smaller, peripheral issues.
They ignore the rocket launch to worry about a minor zoning variance. That is the lens through which we have to analyze this global war to control online age access.
That is the perfect transition. So here's where it gets really interesting, because we move from 19th century adventurers and 21st century rockets right into the core topic.
The Lost War.
The Lost War, to control online content by age. And this struggle, it's between the desire for protection and the technological reality that makes enforcement basically impossible.
Right. And we have two key case studies that Tenenbaum highlighted, starting with the UK's attempt at regulating adult content.
This was a big deal when it was announced.
A huge deal. The UK Parliament's effort here was highly publicized, and it focused specifically on requiring age verification for sites showing pornography.
The mandate required sites to ensure the user was, what, 18 or older?
Actually, even stricter. They required the user was 21 years or older. It was a very strict requirement aimed at protecting adolescents.
And the enforcement mechanism? What was the stick?
Massive fines. Punitive, potentially company-killing fines for any platform serving content in the UK that failed to comply.
So the expectation was that this would immediately deter minors.
That was the public line, yeah.
But the immediate, and you could argue more massive unintended consequence, wasn't a drop in child access, but a huge drop in adult usage.
A staggering drop. According to the analysis Tenenbaum shared, traffic to these sites plummeted by 50%. 50.
50% immediately.
Immediately. So you have to ask why. Why did half the adult user base suddenly stop accessing legal content?
And it boils down entirely to the fear of creating a honeypot of personal data.
Exactly. When the UK mandated rigorous age verification, it meant users would have to provide some form of verifiable ID.
Like a passport scan or credit card details.
A passport scan, maybe biometric data, or yes, financial details. And adults were just unwilling to create a permanent, traceable digital record of their consumption habits linked directly to their real identity.
Because the risk of a future hack or just a data leak was too high.
Way too high. And you have to think about the depth of that social stigma.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you belong to a specific religious community where this content is strictly forbidden.
Or if you're a high-profile political figure.
Right.
Or a teacher.
Or even if you were viewing content that might lead to deep social or professional stigma-like content related to specific sexual minorities or fetishes.
Having a permanent, verifiable digital record tied to that viewing habit creates a massive potential for future blackmail or social ruin or even professional termination.
The risk is just enormous.
So the choice became sacrifice privacy or sacrifice access.
And for half the adult user population, privacy won, hands down. The law effectively forced privacy-conscious adults offline.
Okay, so that's what happened to the adults. But what about the minors, the very people the law was designed to protect?
Well, the minors who still wanted access, they just sought out the immediate, predictable, technical bypass.
A VPN.
The VPN, the virtual private network, which is a tool many of our listeners probably use every day for business or, accessing geo-restricted content from streaming services.
Sure. But in this regulatory context, it's a giant unblockable loophole.
Can you just break down the basic mechanism for us? How does it work?
Absolutely. So, as Tenenbaum explained, a VPN basically reroutes your internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel to a server in a different geographical location.
So if you're in London, you can make it look like you're in New York.
Precisely. If you're in London but you use a VPN server based in New York, every website you visit and every regulator monitoring traffic thinks you are physically in New York. Your UK IP address is completely masked.
And that's because if a UK user can simply route their connection through a server in France or New York, or, crucially, through a server in a jurisdiction with no regulatory agreement.
Like Ghana or Ethiopia, which is where Tenenbaum noted many of these adult sites are actually hosted.
Then the UK law becomes instantly toothless.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And that leads to the massive systemic enforcement problem. Regulators only have jurisdiction over companies operating within their own territory.
So if the primary platform serving the content is based in a developing nation that either doesn't care about UK law or maybe even actively benefits from the traffic,
then the British government has no one to fine, they have no way to enforce their mandate, and no mechanism to stop the content from flowing into the UK via an encrypted, location-masked VPN tunnel.
the entire regulatory structure just collapses on the technical reality of the open internet.
It's like they legislated against the laws of physics, or in this case, the fundamental architecture of the internet. It was doomed from the start.
So that was the UK's failed attempt to control content by age, a pretty clear failure. Now let's look at case study 2, Australia.
Right.
They're going after access to social media accounts for minors. This feels even more ambitious, targeting a much wider range of activities that are, essential to modern social life.
It's far more sweeping. Australia's law, which became effective very recently, prohibits minors under the age of 16 from accessing social media accounts.
And this applies to a specific list of networks.
Yes, a specific closed list of networks. It includes the massive players, like TikTok and all the Meta platforms.
But not WhatsApp.
Not initially, no. WhatsApp was excluded because it's primarily an encrypted messaging service, not a public broadcast platform in the same way. The goal was to keep children off general-purpose social platforms until they're legally defined as older adolescents.
And the burden of enforcement, again, falls squarely on the platforms.
Completely. If X or Meta or TikTok companies that depend heavily on Australian advertising revenue fail to implement a verification mechanism that guarantees their users connecting from Australia are over 16,
They face huge fines.
truly massive fines, potentially crippling to their regional operations. They are now legally required to find a way to accurately age check every single user in the country.
Which immediately creates the same technical and philosophical headache as the UK case, but with this massive added layer.
Yes, a layer related to constitutional free expression.
Right. And Tenenbaum highlighted the challenge brought forward by Reddit, which argued this mandatory age verification law infringes on the right to free expression.
Which is guaranteed, albeit implicitly, under Australian common law.
Wait, I need to fully understand Reddit's argument here. How does forcing identity verification on a 16-year-old infringe on an adult's right to free expression? That seems like a bit of a leap.
It seems like it, but it connects directly to the need for anonymity, which is absolutely essential for true free expression on the web.
Okay, go on.
Reddit's argument was that if every adult is forced to provide verifiable ID, be it a driver's license, a passport, or biometric data, just to post content on a platform, they will simply stop posting.
Especially about sensitive topics where anonymity is crucial.
Exactly. We call it the chilling effect. Think about the types of posts that absolutely require anonymity. You have whistleblowers exposing corporate or government misconduct,
Victims of sexual assault discussing their experiences.
individuals posting about deeply private health matters, or just people expressing political opinions that could be career-limiting if they were traced back to them.
So if the Australian government forces platforms to be de-anonymized in the pursuit of controlling what minors see,
They are sacrificing fundamental political and social speech by adults.
which raises this really important question that has no easy answer. How do you make secure, necessary anonymity and mandatory age verification coexist?
Well, Tenenbaum's conclusion on this is pretty stark.
What is it?
He says you can't. They are mutually exclusive. The law is essentially throwing out the entire concept of secure, anonymous, free expression, a core tenet of liberal democracy, to solve the problem of children accessing TikTok.
And while the platforms have deep pockets and can afford the best lawyers, the philosophical challenge remains.
It's deeply valid. You are imposing a massive societal cost, the loss of anonymity, in pursuit of a technically unachievable regulatory goal, especially given the VPN loophole we just talked about.
And the concern here isn't just about Australia.
Not at all. France has already announced its intent to follow Australia's lead. So this is turning into a kind of spreading regulatory contagion.
That brings us directly to, well, the system loopholes, the whole privacy versus protection debate, and the role of the state. The central identification dilemma is staggering.
It really is.
We discussed the risk of blackmail, but let's go deeper into the technical fear. What kind of proof is actually required, and why is creating a centralized database of verified users so incredibly dangerous?
Well, the lawmakers keep proposing solutions that, from a cybersecurity standpoint, are just insane.
Like what?
Like asking for passports or biometric data. If you do that, you are creating what cybersecurity professionals call the ultimate honeypot.
A centralized repository of the most sensitive, non-renewable data
Your face, your government ID number.
linked directly to your most sensitive consumption habits.
And what happens when that honeypot is inevitably hacked? Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
It becomes a catastrophic national security event.
That's not an exaggeration. Not only do you expose the private habits of millions of citizens, but you create an irresistible target for hostile state actors, for sophisticated criminal organizations, or even just malicious hackers looking to create future phishing scams or perform identity theft at a mass scale.
So the risk is just unacceptable.
Tenenbaum emphasized that it's simply unacceptable. The only marginally feasible method that's ever been tested was the use of credit cards, since minors generally lack them.
But the immediate reaction to that, as we mentioned with the UK, is the profound fear of linking your financial data to sensitive, stigmatized content.
Especially since these platforms are often seen as less secure than major bailing institutions. So the identification methods are either too invasive and dangerous, like biometrics and passports, or they're too risky, like credit cards.
Which takes us right back to the technological loophole that guarantees failure.
The VPN.
And the problem with the VPN is not just that it allows a bypass, but that the attempted regulation actually turns the VPN into an accelerant of harm.
This is the ultimate unintended consequence.
So what does this all mean? The regulation intended to protect children is actually pushing them toward riskier, unregulated parts of the internet.
Exactly. Tell us about the gifts that come with these free VPNs.
Well, a paid, reputable VPN, which is generally secure, costs money. Money that minors don't have.
Right.
Therefore, a minor seeking to bypass these age restrictions is highly likely to turn to a free VPN.
And free VPNs, as Tenenbaum warned, often come with gifts, which is a very cynical term for malicious payloads.
Explain the payload. What are we talking about here?
The free VPN has to monetize somehow, right? It's a business.
Yeah.
That monetization often comes in the form of malware silently installed in the user's device.
What does the malware do?
It allows the VPN provider to use the child's computer for illicit activities like cryptojacking or for botnet operations.
So your computer becomes a zombie in their army.
Precisely. And even worse, the provider may intentionally redirect the user to malicious, unsafe, or even illegal sites.
Why would they do that?
Because those sites, which might contain child pornography or extreme self-harm content, pay a higher referral fee. So the attempt to make known regulated platforms safer.
Ironically, pushes minors toward the murky, highly dangerous, and entirely unregulated dark side of the web via these risky tools.
It's a complete regulatory catastrophe. It makes the problem worse, not better.
And this failure, it leads to the critical philosophical debate Tenenbaum raised. Who is the ultimate babysitter here? Is this the job of the parent, or is the state just completely overstepped its bounds?
Well, in U.S. legal tradition, the principle is that parental control is paramount. Unless the state can prove actual barbarities are occurring. That means outright, demonstrable abuse, neglect, or harm that reaches a mandatory reporting threshold.
And we already have parental control tools. They exist.
Of course. Limits on screen times, access controls on Netflix, software that monitors phone usage. The problem is that many parents don't use them. Or maybe they just feel overwhelmed by the speed of technological change.
But isn't the state intervening precisely because parents have failed? Or because these tools are too complex for the average parent to manage effectively? Why shouldn't the government step in if a tool is fundamentally harmful to mass psychological development?
And that's the core counter-argument. It's a valid point. However, the legislation isn't targeted at addressing failure. It's targeted at blanket prohibition.
It's a sledgehammer, not a scalpel.
Exactly. And Tenenbaum questioned whether the state is acting as a glorified babysitter, interfering in private life on a matter that falls far, far below the legal threshold of abuse. When the state monitors a teenager's TikTok usage, that is a profound shift in the accepted boundary between state power and parental autonomy.
To mandate a social media ban is to legislate parenting itself.
You're legislating parenting,
Yeah.
and there's the enormous social life problem.
Right. While proponents of these laws often focus exclusively on the harms of social media, the bullying, the comparison culture prohibiting access might actually leave a significant subset of children more isolated.
This is a critical point that is so often lost in the regulatory debate.
Yeah.
For children experiencing intense bullying locally, within the confines of their school or neighborhood,
Online networks can be a lifeline.
they provide a vital, sometimes necessary circle of friendship, support, and community. Think of marginalized groups, LGBTQ+ youth, or children with specialized niche interests who can't find peers locally.
They find their tribe online.
Exactly. These digital connections became absolute lifelines during the pandemic, and they remain so for millions of children who feel disconnected from their immediate physical surroundings.
So to legislate them away using a blunt national instrument ignores the fact that for many, the online world is a safe haven.
It's a place where they can communicate with peers who truly understand them, away from local pressures and judgment. Legislating a total ban is not a surgical strike. It's a form of enforced social isolation for the very children it claims it's trying to protect.
On a related note, Tenenbaum provided a fascinating physical example of this regulatory trend from Israel.
Right, and it shows that governments globally are struggling with the same core problem of pervasive device use. But they're approaching the solution very differently.
What was the example?
The example is Israel's education minister banning cell phones and smartphones entirely from schools until age 14.
And this wasn't a fight against adult content or propaganda.
No, not at all. This was a battle for physical social development. The observation was simple. Recess had ceased to be a time for peer play.
It had just become another time for screen usage.
Right, and that eliminates the crucial, messy, real-world development of social skills, of conflict resolution, and of imagination. The policy aimed to restore that real-world peer-to-peer social development.
And it's a functional solution because it uses a physical limitation, a school boundary, to solve a physical problem, which is social atrophy.
Exactly. It respects the boundary of the educational institution while leaving the decision of nighttime use and home access squarely in the hands of the parents.
Contrast that with the Australian approach, which attempts to regulate the entire digital infrastructure of the nation.
It's night and day. The Israeli example, while small, focuses on a treatable problem with a viable solution.
We've covered the failed war for age control, the technical shortcomings, and the philosophical debate over state intervention. Now, let's pivot to Section 4, which is really the heart of Tenenbaum's argument.
And the major failing he identifies in global governance.
The AI joker and misplaced priorities. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, he argues regulatory focus is entirely misplaced.
Absolutely. While lawmakers in Canberra and Westminster are expending all this legislative capital on what he calls a peripheral problem,
Whether a 15-year-old can access TikTok via a free VPN,
they are utterly ignoring the critical existential issue, the fundamental and inevitable reshaping of society by artificial intelligence. He calls this the Great Replacement.
Okay, let's explain the scope of this great replacement as Tenenbaum outlines it. This is more than just technological unemployment. It's a full systemic overhaul.
This is a revolution, unlike anything the human race has encountered, maybe since the Industrial Revolution, but it's happening at an exponentially faster pace.
So we're talking about massive, immediate job loss across entire sectors.
Entire sectors. Think about white-collar jobs, legal review, data analysis, diagnostic medicine, complex coding, even middle management roles.
So jobs that require processing information and making rules-based decisions.
Any job like that. AI can do it faster, cheaper, and more accurately. And this fundamentally breaks the social contract that relies on widespread employment.
It does. It fundamentally questions the entire purpose of traditional schooling.
Why spend 4 years getting a degree to master a skill, say accounting, if an AI can perform 90% of that work within a few years of your graduation?
It renders the human skill set obsolete.
And this situation necessitates immediate, comprehensive governmental planning regarding massive social safety nets like universal basic income and economic restructuring, and a radical overhaul of our educational system.
And instead,
Governments are busy debating VPNs.
And the irony is that these same governments haven't figured out how to restrict minors' access to this far more disruptive and potentially more dangerous technology.
Not even close.
How do you possibly restrict minors' access to powerful generative AI tools like Grok or Gemini?
Well, it's technically impossible for some very fundamental reasons. First, AI learns and evolves at an exponential rate. It far outstrips the speed at which human sensors or regulatory bodies can move.
They can't regulate what the AI will learn tomorrow.
They can't. And second, unlike social media, which requires a specific platform login, AI capabilities are being integrated into every piece of software, every operating system, and soon, every single device. It'll be like regulating oxygen.
And a determined minor doesn't even need to ask the AI directly for instructions on illegal activities. They can use sophisticated prompting techniques.
Exactly. They can use prompt engineering to bypass the system guardrails. A child could ask an AI how to perform payroll fraud by breaking down the steps into seemingly benign theoretical questions.
Or, on a more disturbing level, theoretically prompt the AI to explain the high-level steps required to synthesize dangerous compounds or bypass security mechanisms.
The system cannot stop that kind of sophisticated, layered inquiry. Yet, it gets tripped up by the most basic common details. And that is the tragedy of what he calls the bias or overregulation trap.
And that is where the humor, but also the deep frustration comes in. The attempt to regulate AI content and prevent perceived bias or liability often leads to just absurd restrictions.
Making the systems idiotic, as Tenenbaum described it.
The programmers, terrified of public backlash, they just overcorrect wildly. They build guardrails so strict that the AI becomes unusable or, frankly, comical.
And he gave us two perfect examples. The first one was the AI refusing to change a name on a graffiti photo.
Explain that one.
A user showed the AI a photo of street graffiti containing the German philosopher's surname, Heidegger. The user just wanted to edit the name to something else.
And the AI refused.
Refused. It cited that Heidegger is a public figure. Not only is Heidegger long dead, but the AI entirely missed the context. It was just a common surname scrawled on a wall. not an attack on philosophical discourse.
The AI was operating within ridiculously cautious parameters.
Fearing a hypothetical defamation lawsuit that could never, ever happen.
And the second example is even more indicative of this systemic failure, the censorship of classical art. Wait, they blocked a Renaissance painting? Seriously.
Seriously, the very same AI systems that struggle to restrict genuinely harmful content like instructions on self-harm or theoretical criminal strategies will vigorously restrict images of nudity.
Even when sourced from classical Renaissance paintings?
Tenenbaum specifically mentioned La Mancha Desnuda by Goya. You cannot prompt the AI to generate or even display this kind of historical artistic nudity because the system's guardrails flag any nudity, regardless of artistic context, historical significance, or intent.
The contradiction is just staggering, and it exposes this misplaced fear. The government is worried about protecting children from Goya's masterpiece?
But it fails to protect them from dangerous, sophisticated prompting techniques that could lead to instructions on destructive behavior. The regulatory focus is completely backward. They're fighting a ghost instead of addressing the fundamental threat.
And this feeds directly back into the political motivation behind these online age laws.
Oh, absolutely.
Tenenbaum recounted the experience of Australian legislators when they were questioned about their vote on the social media ban.
And they admitted the core motivation. They said they voted for the law because it brings votes.
Legislating for the gallery. That's the definition of political expediency.
It is. No politician in a democracy can afford to vote against a measure that's framed as protecting children. It's the lowest hanging political fruit possible.
They get to stand up, claim credit for taking action, and look strong on family values.
Even if that protection is easily bypassed by a free app a month later, it allows governments to appear busy solving a politically popular problem while entirely sidestepping the profoundly difficult, complex, and unrewarding work of preparing society for the true economic earthquake that AI represents.
And that's where your analysis comes in, connecting this back to the grand strategic failure. What does this misplaced focus ultimately cost us, beyond just wasted money and bad laws?
It costs us valuable time. As Tenenbaum stressed, not all problems have a viable technical solution. Trying to fully block the internet for an entire age cohort is one of those problems, as the VPN failure clearly demonstrates.
It's time wasted when these major existential problems like the job replacement crisis driven by AI are looming and require immediate focused governmental attention.
He offered a very helpful medical analogy. He said if you have two possible diagnoses for a patient, and one is untreatable while the other allows for a cure, a good doctor focuses all their effort on the treatable diagnosis.
And legislators should focus on the problems where government intervention can actually make a difference.
Exactly. Preparing for AI, not on the problems that guarantee technical and philosophical failure.
Before we wrap up the main topic, we also have time for a significant sweep of the geopolitical news as discussed by Tenenbaum, specifically focusing on two highly concerning global hotspots.
Yes, starting with Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro. The analysis is that despite ongoing economic and political pressure, Maduro is not going to fall easily through the current U.S. strategy.
So targeted sanctions and diplomatic threats have proven insufficient.
Insufficient to truly dismantle the regime's power structure.
What, then, is the suggested path to truly apply pressure on the regime that could lead to genuine change?
A total blockade of ports and airspace. The goal would be to prevent the sale of oil, and therefore the essential cash flow that keeps the regime solvent.
Because Maduro relies entirely on the money from petroleum exports to buy the loyalty of his military and his political supporters.
If the global market cannot access Venezuelan oil, the regime starves of hard currency, and his castle of power will rapidly collapse.
And there's historical precedent for such drastic action in Venezuela, correct?
Absolutely. Tenenbaum reminded us that in the 19th century, Venezuela defaulted on debts owed to England and France.
Then what happened?
Both countries responded by sending their navies and imposing a tight blockade on Venezuelan ports until payment terms were agreed upon. This method, while drastic and requiring international coordination, has been historically effective.
And this comes at a time when Maduro is becoming increasingly isolated geographically.
That's the other key factor. Venezuela is surrounded by a growing number of right-leaning governments in the region. Honduras, Bolivia, Chile, and there's the potential for a shift in Colombia in upcoming elections.
His only reliable regional ally is Cuba.
And Cuba is itself suffering from crippling economic failure, so it offers little practical support. Maduro is an island in a shifting political sea.
And we have to mention the Nobel Peace Prize and the geopolitical messaging around it.
Maria Corina Machado winning the Nobel Peace Prize was a massive symbolic blow to Maduro. But Tenenbaum noted the immediate, cynical response from similar authoritarian regimes globally.
What was the response?
On the very day of her announcement, Iran arrested one of its own Nobel laureates, and this was viewed by analysts as a direct, coordinated message to the West.
A message that these symbolic soft power actions are meaningless to regimes committed to maintaining power through force.
Exactly. They are signaling that they will not be shamed into compliance.
Okay, moving on to Ukraine and Russia. The outlook offered by the analysts Tenenbaum follows is deeply concerning for the near term.
Very concerning, with a specific focus on 2026. There is deep anxiety about Russian aggression escalating significantly. March 2026 is suggested as a critical time frame, potentially linked to post-U.S. election political instability and a perceived window of opportunity for Moscow.
So analysts worry that Russia will choose to test Western resolve by escalating beyond the current conflict zones.
Potentially even moving to attack Estonia or other vulnerable NATO border areas. The question is how far they can push before eliciting a true unified NATO response. This testing of boundaries is a major, major concern.
And regarding the peace discussions, the proposed Donbas Free Trade Zone peace plan is viewed with deep skepticism.
If not outright cynicism. Zelensky's fear is palpable and deeply rational. The idea is to create a neutral economic zone, but Ukraine worries that Russia will simply use the zone as a Trojan horse.
Like they did in Crimea.
Exactly. They fear Russia will infiltrate the area with ostensibly civilian forces, the little green men, and then seize control, making the zone a permanent de facto Russian territory. Nobody trusts Russia to honor the terms of any agreement.
And compounding all of this is the observation Tenenbaum highlighted.
Reports of Chinese soldiers actively fighting on the Russian side, which complicates the conflict tremendously and makes the global outlook for 2026 look increasingly difficult and unpredictable.
This whole conversation with Tenenbaum has spanned from, 19th century American rogues to the threat of global war, but the main thread remains how rapidly advancing technology is disrupting our lives.
Whether it's the internet or AI.
And how governance is fundamentally failing to keep pace or even correctly identify the true threats.
The core lesson from Mookie Tenenbaum's insights is clear. The global effort to police the digital age has hit major technical and philosophical roadblocks, and restrictive laws in the UK and Australia are easily bypassed by VPNs.
And they threaten fundamental tenets of free expression and privacy, especially for adults.
And while politicians are focused on scoring easy political points by legislating ineffective protection for children, the real danger, the massive societal and economic shift caused by artificial intelligence and the rising tide of geopolitical aggression, is being completely ignored.
We are focused on the small fire outside the door.
While the structural foundation of the building is cracking under the weight of the AI revolution.
That is precisely the challenge. So a final thought for you to chew on. If powerful, wealthy governments cannot effectively regulate the content a teenager sees on a known, centralized platform like TikTok,
a task that is failing because of a simple, ubiquitous technology like the VPN.
What capacity do we truly have to prepare for a world where generative AI fundamentally changes the need for work, for education, and for social structure itself?
We need a radical and immediate shift in legislative focus. We have to move away from the impossible task of controlling current communication tools and dedicate all our governmental and intellectual resources to preparing for the existential overhaul of the next generation of tools the AI engine guarantees.
That is something to keep in mind as this technological shift accelerates and the political window to act closes. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.